3 days. That's how long Clara Bennett sat on the Ridgewater Depot platform, waiting for a man who would never come. Her trunk stood beside her like a tombstone, marking the death of every promise she'd believed. No food, no money, no future. Just the hollow knowledge that somewhere in this frontier town, her intended groom had married another woman without warning her. The station master's pitying glances had turned to irritation, then disgust. Respectable women didn't linger alone. Desperate ones did. And Clara Bennett, schoolteacher, optimist, fool, had become something worse than desperate. She'd become invisible. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. And if you believe second chances exist even when hope runs dry, stay with us until the end. Hit that like button and let's begin. The April wind cut through Clara's wool coat like it wasn't there. She'd stopped feeling her toes sometime yesterday afternoon, stopped caring about the stairs around midday today. The platform stretched before her, weathered planks stained dark by decades of boot leather and tobacco spit, and she'd memorized every knot, every nail head, every gap between boards wide enough to lose a coin. The 347 from Cheyenne rattled in, belching steam and cinders. Clara didn't move. She'd learned that trains brought hope only to people who still had destinations. "Ma'am." The station master's voice had lost its courtesy 2 days ago. Now it carried the flat insistence of a man dealing with an obstruction. "You can't stay here come nightfall. Got regulations." Clara lifted her eyes. Martin Jeffers stood 6 feet back, as if proximity to failure might be contagious. His brass buttons caught the late afternoon light, official and unforgiving. "I'm waiting for someone," she said. The words tasted like ash. She'd said them so many times they'd stopped meaning anything. "No, ma'am, you're not." Jeffers pulled a telegram from his vest pocket, handled it like something diseased. "This came yesterday. Figured you'd want to know formal-like." The paper trembled between his fingers. Clara stared at it, recognition dawning with the slow, sick certainty of frostbite setting in. Mr. Charles Whitmore married Mrs. Beatrice Holloway 3 weeks past. Judge Carver presided. They're settled in the house he built for... Jeffers cleared his throat. For his intended. The house he built for his intended. Clara almost laughed. Almost. The sound caught somewhere behind her breastbone and died there. "I see." Her voice came out steady. Strange, how calm could feel like drowning. Jeffers shifted his weight, boots scraping. "Look, there's a church. Reverend's wife sometimes takes in women in circumstances. Can't promise nothing, but I understand, thank you. She didn't understand. Didn't understand how Charles could write 6 months of letters, detailed, warm, promising, and then simply stop. Didn't understand how a man could ask a woman to cross 800 miles on faith alone, then marry someone else without a word of warning. Didn't understand how she'd been foolish enough to sell every possession she owned, burn every bridge in Philadelphia, and step onto a westbound train with nothing but a stranger's promises and her grandmother's wedding dress packed in tissue paper. The dress. Clara looked down at her trunk. Inside, wrapped careful and hopeful, white silk she'd never wear. The irony cut deeper than the wind. Jeffers backed away, clearly relieved to be done with unpleasant duty. "Train leaves for Cheyenne at dawn. Mike could get back east if you..." He trailed off. They both knew what her pockets held. A handkerchief, 3 pennies, a ticket stub worth nothing. Clara watched him retreat to the warmth of his office. Through the window, she could see the potbelly stove glowing orange, the coffee pot steaming. Her stomach cramped. She'd eaten the last of her bread yesterday morning. The depot didn't serve women traveling alone, and the hotel required payment in advance. Ridgewater spread before her in the fading light, a scatter of buildings clinging to the rail line like barnacles. False-fronted shops, a livery, what might be a saloon. Beyond them, prairie rolled away in endless swells of brown and sage green, broken only by distant mountains still white with snow. The land looked like it had been carved by a blade. Hard, unforgiving, exact, beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with mercy. A woman crossed the street below, skirts kicking up dust. She glanced toward the depot, saw Clara, and deliberately looked away. Too quick, too pointed. Clara recognized the expression. She'd seen it in Philadelphia, too. That particular calculation respectable women made when measuring another woman's fall from grace. Fallen. The word lodged in her throat. She'd fallen, all right, straight off the edge of the world. The sun touched the mountains, bleeding gold across their peaks. Clara thought about walking, just walking into that empty land until her legs gave out and the prairie took her, clean, final. No more shame, no more hunger, no more watching strangers decide she wasn't worth kindness. Movement near the platform stairs caught her eye. A boy. Small, maybe 6 or 7, dressed in clothes a size too large. He climbed the steps one careful foot at a time, brown eyes fixed on Clara with unsettling intensity. She should look away, should gather what remained of her dignity and pretend children didn't exist. But the boy approached with the fearless certainty of the very young, stopping just beyond arm's reach. "Are you sad?" he asked. Clara's throat tightened. "Yes." "How come?" "That's a complicated question." The boy considered this, head tilted. "Papa says complicated means grown-ups don't want to explain." Despite everything, Clara felt her mouth curve, almost a smile. "Your papa sounds wise." "He's sad, too, since Mama went to heaven." The boy said it matter-of-fact, reporting weather. "Mrs. Harrow says I shouldn't talk about it. But Mama was real. Pretending she wasn't don't seem right." Something cracked in Clara's chest. She looked at this small, serious child and saw herself reflected back, someone insisting on truth when lies would be so much easier. "No," she said softly. "Pretending doesn't seem right." The boy moved closer, studying her trunk. "You waiting for someone?" "I was, but he's not coming." "Did he die too?" "No, he just chose differently." The boy absorbed this, nodding like it made perfect sense. "Papa says choices are important. He says every choice is a seed and you gotta be careful what you plant." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked hard, refusing them. "Your papa sounds very wise indeed." "Jamie!" A man's voice, sharp with panic. "Jamie, get back here right now!" The boy, Jamie, turned as a figure emerged from the depot's far end, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the controlled urgency of someone used to crisis. He reached them in 4 long strides, catching Jamie's shoulder. "What did I say about wandering off?" The man's voice carried equal parts fear and frustration. "You can't just—" He stopped, finally seeing Clara. Actually seeing her. His face did something complicated. Recognition without knowing, concern fighting propriety. He was younger than she'd expected from the voice, mid-30s maybe, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of winter storms. A working man's hands, scarred and capable. A rancher, she guessed, from the worn leather vest and boots that had seen real labor. "I apologize," he said. "My son shouldn't have bothered you." "He didn't bother me." Clara heard how her voice sounded. Hollow, distant. She tried to strengthen it. "He's a kind boy." Jamie looked up at his father. "She's sad, Papa." The man she was waiting for chose different. The rancher's expression shifted. Clara watched him piece it together. The trunk, the depot. 3 days of waiting everyone in town must have noticed. His jaw tightened. "Jamie, go wait by the wagon." "But now." The boy went, casting one backward glance that held more compassion than Clara could bear. She looked away, fixing her gaze on the mountains, safer than meeting this stranger's eyes. "Ma'am," the rancher's voice had gentled. "You got people in town? Somewhere to stay?" Clara almost laughed. "No." "Any funds?" The question should have humiliated her. Instead, it felt like relief. Someone finally asking the practical things instead of dancing around them. 3 pennies. He swore, soft and inventive. Then, "Sorry, that wasn't... You eaten today?" "Yesterday morning." Another curse, bitten off. Clara risked a glance. He was staring at her trunk like it had personally offended him, working his jaw the way men did when they were wrestling with decisions. "Look," he said finally, "I don't know your situation and I'm not asking. But I got a ranch 3 miles out. Food's hot, work's honest if you want it. Mrs. Harrow runs the house. She's particular, but she's fair. You could rest, get warm, figure out your next step. Clara's instinct screamed warning. Strange man, isolated ranch, woman alone and desperate. Every cautionary tale she'd ever heard, but another voice whispered underneath, what's he going to take that hasn't already been stolen? Why? The question came out sharper than she meant. Why would you help me? The rancher met her eyes. His were steady, tired, honest, in a way that made her chest ache. Because my son just spent 5 minutes talking to you, and you didn't once tell him his questions were improper. You didn't shoo him away or treat him like an inconvenience. He glanced toward where Jamie waited by a wagon. And because I know what it's like to stand somewhere and realize the world just changed the rules without telling you. Clara looked at her trunk. At the platform. At the town that had already decided she was someone to pity and avoid. At the mountains bleeding sunset across their faces, indifferent and eternal. At the boy by the wagon, watching with eyes too old for his face. One meal, she heard herself say. Then I'll decide. The rancher nodded once, sharp. Fair enough. He moved past her to lift her trunk. Did it easy, like it weighed nothing, and headed for the wagon. Clara stood frozen, her body refusing the decision her mouth had made. Jamie appeared at her elbow. You coming? Yes, I suppose I am. He slipped his small hand into hers. The touch broke something loose in Clara's throat. She looked down at this child who'd seen her at her lowest and offered presence instead of judgment. Thank you, she whispered. Jamie squeezed her fingers. Papa says everybody needs a hand sometimes. Says it don't make you weak. Just makes you human. Clara let him lead her to the wagon. The rancher had secured her trunk and was checking the horses. A matched pair, well kept. Their coats brushed smooth. Everything about the rig spoke of care, attention, pride without pretension. He handed her up to the bench, movements impersonal and efficient. Jamie scrambled between them, small body radiating warmth. Grant Mercer, the rancher said, gathering the reins. That's my name. Figure you should know it. Clara Bennett. He nodded, clicked to the horses. The wagon rolled forward, platform falling behind. Clara looked back once, saw the depot shrinking, saw the town lights beginning to glow against the coming dark, saw the ghost of herself still sitting there, waiting for a man who would never come. Then Grant turned the team toward open country, and Ridgewater disappeared. The prairie spread before them, vast and darkening. No landmarks, no signposts, just wheel ruts cutting through grass that whispered secrets to the wind. The temperature dropped with the sun, and Clara felt the cold seep through her coat. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold in heat that wasn't there. Jamie pressed against her side. You cold? A little. He pulled a blanket from beneath the seat, rough wool, smelling of horse and hay, and draped it across her lap. The gesture, small and unbidden, made Clara's eyes burn. Thank you. You keep saying that, Jamie observed, because people keep being kind. Grant made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. Clara glanced at him. His profile stood sharp against the dimming sky, attention fixed on the road ahead. They rode in silence. Not the strained quiet of strangers forcing politeness, but something easier. Jamie hummed tunelessly, swinging his legs. The horse's hooves beat steady rhythm against packed earth. Somewhere distant, a coyote called, high and lonesome, answered by others in a chorus that raised the hair on Clara's neck. They won't hurt you, Grant said, not looking over. Coyotes. They're just talking to each other. What are they saying? Depends who you ask. Jamie thinks they're telling stories. The boy nodded, solemn. Mama said coyotes remember everything, all the old stories before people came. Grant's hands tightened on the reins, subtle but visible. Clara recognized that flinch, the way grief could ambush you through a child's innocent words. Your mama sounds like she was a storyteller, Clara said softly. Jamie brightened. She was. She knew stories about everything, the mountains, the stars, He stopped, looking up at his father. Is it okay to talk about Mama? Grant's throat worked. Yeah, son. It's okay. Mrs. Harrow says it makes you sad. Mrs. Harrow means well, but your mama was real like you said. Talking about her keeps her real. Jamie considered this, then leaned back against Clara. Mama would have liked you. She always said the best people are the ones who've been broken and put themselves back together. Clara's breath caught. She felt Grant's attention shift, felt him measuring her reaction. She kept her eyes forward, blinking against the sting. I'm not sure I've managed the putting back together part yet. That's okay, Jamie said. Maybe you just need the right glue. This time Grant definitely laughed. Rough and surprised and genuine. Clara felt an answering smile tug at her mouth despite everything. They crested a rise and the ranch appeared below. Not large, but solid. A 2-story house with a wide porch, barn, and outbuildings forming a rough square around a central yard. Lamplight glowed in the windows, warm and beckoning against the gathering dark. Home, Clara thought, then crushed the word before it could take root. Grant pulled the wagon into the yard. Before he'd fully stopped, the front door opened and a woman emerged, tall, spare, dressed in black with gray hair pulled severe. She stood on the porch like a general surveying troops, and her expression when she saw Clara could have frosted glass. Grant Mercer, what have you done? Grant climbed down, offered Clara his hand. She took it, aware of the woman's sharp eyes tracking every movement. Brought someone who needs supper, Mrs. Harrow. This is Miss Bennet. She'll be staying the night. Will she now? Mrs. Harrow descended the steps, stopping a careful distance away. She looked Clara over, thorough, assessing, missing nothing. The worn coat, the pinched face, the desperate edge poorly hidden. Clara lifted her chin. She'd been examined before. She could endure it again. I don't run a charity house, Mrs. Harrow said. Didn't ask you to. Asked you to set another place at supper. The two of them locked eyes. Clara recognized the dynamic, old argument, familiar ground. Mrs. Harrow's expression suggested she'd lost this fight before and didn't enjoy repeating the experience. Fine, but she works for her keep, even if it's just one night. I won't have idleness under this roof. Fair enough. Grant turned to Clara. That acceptable to you? Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to protect what remained of her pride. But her stomach cramped with hunger, and the lamplight looked so warm, and she was so tired of being cold. Yes, thank you. Mrs. Harrow sniffed. We'll see if you're still thankful after you meet my standards. Come on then, can't have you dripping platform dirt through my clean house. She turned and marched inside. Clara looked at Grant. She's not as harsh as she sounds, he said quietly. Lost her husband and 2 sons to fever 5 years back. Edges got sharp to keep herself together. Clara understood that. Understood it bone deep. Jamie grabbed her hand. I'll show you where to put your things. He pulled her toward the house. Clara glanced back once, found Grant watching with an expression she couldn't read. Then Jamie tugged harder, and she let herself be led inside. The house smelled of bread and wood smoke and lye soap, clean, honest smells that made something in Clara's chest unclench. The main room held a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, braided rugs worn soft with age. Nothing fancy, but everything tended, cared for. Mrs. Harrow appeared from what must be the kitchen, carrying a basin of warm water and a towel. Wash up, you look half dead. She set the basin on a side table, pointed to a hallway. Second door on the left. You'll find clean clothes on the bed. They were She paused. They'll fit well enough. Change and come to supper. We eat at 6 sharp. She disappeared back into the kitchen before Clara could respond. Jamie grinned up at her. She likes you. When she doesn't like people, she makes them wash in the yard. Clara couldn't help it. She laughed. Actually laughed, the sound startling in her own ears. The room Mrs. Harrow had indicated was small but immaculate. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window looking out toward the mountains. And on the bed, laid out careful, a simple dress, dark blue calico, practically new. Clara touched the fabric. Soft, well-made, worn by someone who'd cared for their belongings, someone who'd died, leaving a closet full of clothes that no longer fit anyone. She changed quickly, hands shaking from more than cold. The dress fit almost perfectly, just slightly loose in the shoulders. Clara caught her reflection in the washstand mirror and barely recognized herself. 3 days of waiting had carved hollows in her cheeks, shadowed her eyes, aged her a decade. But the dress made her look almost human again. She washed her face and hands, finger-combed her hair into something approaching order, and returned to the main room. The table had been set, 4 places, plain white dishes, a pitcher of milk. Steam rose from a tureen in the center, and the smell made Clara's knees weak. Grant stood by the fireplace, watching the flames. He'd washed too, changed his shirt. When he turned and saw her, something flickered across his face. That was Sarah's favorite dress. Sarah. The name settled into the room like a presence. I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrow said, no, it's good. Seeing it worn again. He looked away, throat working. She'd want it used, not packed away gathering dust. Mrs. Harrow emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of bread. Sit. Food's ready. They gathered at the table, Grant at the head, Jamie to his right, Clara across from the boy, Mrs. Harrow at the foot. The housekeeper ladled stew into bowls, thick with vegetables and meat, rich enough to make Clara's mouth water. We say grace in this house, Mrs. Harrow announced, fixing Clara with a pointed look. Grant cleared his throat. Actually, Mrs. Harrow, I think we can— No. Clara met the older woman's eyes. If that's the custom, I'll respect it. Mrs. Harrow's expression softened fractionally. She bowed her head. The others followed. Clara did too, listening to the simple, honest words asking blessing on the food and those who shared it. When she looked up, Grant was watching her with that same unreadable expression. Eat, he said quietly, before it gets cold. Clara lifted her spoon. The first bite hit her system like a shock, warmth and salt and substance after days of nothing. She forced herself to eat slowly, aware of Mrs. Harrow's assessing gaze. Jamie chattered between bites, telling stories about the ranch, the horses, a new calf born last week. Grant listened with the patience of someone used to his son's running commentary, occasionally redirecting when Jamie's stories spiraled too far afield. Mrs. Harrow watched them all, especially Clara. Testing, measuring. When the meal ended, Clara moved to clear the table without being asked. Mrs. Harrow made a small sound, surprise, maybe approval. You wash, I'll dry. They worked in silence, falling into easy rhythm. Clara washed each dish careful, thorough, the way her grandmother had taught her. Mrs. Harrow dried with the same attention to detail. You're not what I expected, the older woman said finally. What did you expect? Someone softer, someone who'd cry or make excuses or need coddling, she chummed. Clara set another plate in the rack. I've done my crying. Doesn't change anything. No, it doesn't. Mrs. Harrow dried the plate, set it in the cupboard with precise care. Grant told me what happened. Man who'd do that to a woman isn't worth the tears. I know, doesn't make it hurt less. No, but knowing helps you survive it. They finished the dishes. Mrs. Harrow hung the towel to dry, turned to face Clara full on. You can stay, not just tonight. Stay until you figure out what's next. But I run this house and I have rules. You work for your keep, you pull your weight, and you don't go breaking hearts around here. Her gaze flicked toward the main room, where Grant's low voice answered one of Jamie's questions. That man's been through enough. Boy, too, they don't need more pain. Clara's throat tightened. I have no intention of hurting anyone. Intention isn't the same as outcome, just tread careful. This family's held together with spit and string. Don't be the thing that breaks it. Before Clara could respond, Jamie appeared in the doorway. Papa says come look at the stars. They're really bright tonight. Mrs. Harrow shooed them out. Go on, I'll finish here. Clara followed Jamie to the porch. Grant stood at the railing, face tilted toward the sky. Above them, stars blazed, thousands upon thousands, more than Clara had ever seen. The prairie night held no competing light, and the heavens opened vast and diamond scattered. Oh, she breathed. Pretty, right? Jamie pressed against the railing beside his father. Mama used to tell me the stars were holes in the sky where heaven's light shines through. Grant's hand found his son's shoulder. She did. They stood together, 3 people brought together by circumstance and need, watching light that had traveled unimaginable distances just to reach this moment. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not hope. She didn't dare trust that yet. But maybe its precursor. Maybe the faintest suggestion that the story wasn't over, that the platform didn't mark her ending after all. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For supper. For—" she gestured helplessly. "Everything." Grant looked at her, really looked, and Clara saw understanding in his eyes, the kind that came from standing in his own dark places. "Sometimes we all need a hand," he said, echoing his son's earlier words. "No shame in that." Jamie yawned, huge and unself-conscious. Grant ruffled his hair. "Bed, buddy. School tomorrow." "But now." The boy sighed dramatically but went, pausing to give Clara an impulsive hug that nearly undid her completely. "Good night, Miss Clara. I'm glad you're here." Then he was gone, thundering up the stairs with a child's boundless energy. Grant watched him go, expression soft. "He's a good boy," Clara said. "He is. Better than I deserve, probably." Grant turned back to the stars. His mother, Sarah, was the best of us. Kind, without being soft, strong, without being hard. She made everything better just by being in it. How long? 2 years. Fever took her in 3 days. One moment she was fine, the next— He stopped, jaw tight. Jamie almost doesn't remember her. That's the part that kills me. He's forgetting. He remembers the stories, the important things. Grant looked at her. "You think so?" "I know so. The way he talks about her, she's alive in him. Different than memory, maybe, but real." Something eased in Grant's shoulders. "Mrs. Harrow thinks I talk about Sarah too much. Says it keeps Jamie from moving forward." "Mrs. Harrow's wrong." Clara said it with quiet certainty. "You can't move forward by pretending the past didn't happen. You move forward by carrying it with you." Grant studied her, and Clara felt the weight of that attention, measuring, considering, seeing things she wasn't sure she wanted seen. "What did he promise you?" he asked finally. "The man who didn't come." Clara's hands tightened on the railing. "Everything. A home. Partnership. A life that made sense." "And what did you promise him?" "The same. And I would have kept it." Her voice cracked. "I sold everything, left everyone, came 800 miles on nothing but faith, and he couldn't even send a telegram." The fury surprised her, sudden and clean, burning through the numbness that had settled over the past 3 days. She'd been so focused on shame, on failure, that she'd forgotten to be angry. Grant nodded slowly. "Good." "Good? Anger's healthy, means you're not broken all the way through." He pushed off the railing. "Get some rest, Miss Bennett. Morning comes early around here, and Mrs. Harrow wasn't joking about earning your keep." He headed inside, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, his loss. Anyone who'd walk away from a promise like that isn't worth the breath it takes to curse them. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with the stars and the vast, whispering prairie. She stood there until the cold drove her inside. The house had settled into quiet. Mrs. Harrow's door closed, Grant's footsteps overhead as he checked on Jamie. Clara climbed to the room she'd been given, found the lamp already lit, the bed turned down. She sank onto the mattress, feeling every mile she'd traveled, every disappointment she'd endured. The dress, Sarah's dress, smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. Someone else's life, wrapped around her like armor. Clara looked out the window at the mountains standing black against the star-filled sky. Somewhere beyond them lay Philadelphia, the life she'd known, the person she'd been. That woman felt impossibly distant now. That woman had believed in letters and promises, had thought love meant certainty. This woman, the one sitting in a dead woman's dress in a stranger's house, knew better. But as she slid under the quilts and felt their weight settle over her, Clara allowed herself one dangerous thought. Maybe knowing better wasn't the same as knowing everything. Maybe there were still surprises left. Maybe the platform wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of something else entirely. Outside, a coyote called, high and lonesome and strangely beautiful. Clara closed her eyes and let sleep take her, falling into dreams where the stars burned holes in the sky and heaven's light poured through, bright enough to guide even the most lost traveler home. Dawn came cold and exact, light spilling across the prairie like water finding its level. Clara woke to the sound of boots on hardwood below, the creak of the stove being stoked, the low murmur of voices planning the day's work. For a moment she lay still, disoriented by quilts that smelled of cedar and a ceiling she didn't recognize. Then memory returned. The platform, the waiting, the choice that had brought her here. She dressed quickly in Sarah's blue calico, fingers clumsy with cold. The washstand held fresh water, ice-edged but clean. Clara scrubbed her face until her skin stung, pinned her hair with shaking hands, and descended to face whatever Mrs. Harrow's standards demanded. The kitchen was bright with lamplight and busy with purpose. Mrs. Harrow stood at the stove, flipping flapjacks with the precision of a woman who'd fed working men for decades. She glanced up as Clara entered, sharp eyes cataloging everything from the neatly pinned hair to the straight shoulders. "Coffee's hot. Pour yourself a cup and start on those dishes from last night's prep. They've been soaking." No good morning, no pleasantries. Just expectation delivered in a voice that brooked no argument. Clara poured coffee, strong enough to strip paint the way frontier women made it, and moved to the sink. The dishes waited in gray water, grease congealed on their surfaces. She rolled up her sleeves and began scrubbing, falling into the rhythm her grandmother had taught her. Clean the worst first, work methodical, waste nothing. Mrs. Harrow watched from the corner of her eye, saying nothing but missing nothing either. After 10 minutes she grunted, which Clara interpreted as approval. "You know your way around a kitchen. My grandmother raised me. She believed idle hands invited trouble." "Smart woman." Mrs. Harrow flipped the last flapjack onto a platter. "Set the table. 4 places. Grant takes his coffee black, Jamie drowns everything in milk, and I like mine with 1 sugar." Clara dried her hands and moved to comply. The table was already laid with plates. She added cups in the coffee pot, retrieved milk from the cold box on the back porch, found sugar in a tin marked in careful script. Everything in this house had its place, its order, its reason. Grant appeared as she was setting out forks, Jamie trailing behind him like a sleepy shadow. The boy's hair stood up and back, and his eyes were half closed against the lamplight. "Morning," Grant said, voice rough with early hours. His gaze found Clara, held for a beat, then moved to Mrs. Harrow. "Smells good." "Always does." "Sit down before it gets cold." They gathered at the table, the same configuration as supper. Mrs. Harrow said grace, shorter this morning, focused on the day's work and safety for those doing it. Clara kept her head bowed, aware of Jamie peeking at her between his father's arm and the table edge. The flapjacks were perfect, golden, fluffy, sweet with molasses. Clara ate slowly, mindful of her stomach after days of deprivation. Grant and Mrs. Harrow discussed the day in shorthand that spoke of long partnership. The fence line needed checking, the sorrel mare was due to foal. Supplies should be ordered from town before the month turned. Jamie pushed food around his plate, yawning every few seconds. "Eat," Grant said. "Can't go to school on an empty stomach." "Don't want to go to school. We've had this conversation." "But Miss Pritchard doesn't like me." Grant's expression shifted to something Clara recognized, a parent navigating the minefield between validation and discipline. "Miss Pritchard doesn't dislike you. She just has rules. She says I ask too many questions." "That's because you ask too many questions." Jamie's lower lip jutted. "You said questions are how we learn." "They are. But there's a time and place for everything." Clara found herself speaking before she'd decided to. "What kind of questions do you ask?" Jamie's face brightened. "Everything! Like, why does the sky change colors, and where do the geese go in winter, and how do spiders know how to make webs without anyone teaching them?" "Those are good questions." "Miss Pritchard says they're distractions." Grant sighed. "Miss Pritchard has 20 students in a one-room schoolhouse. She's doing her best." "Perhaps," Clara heard herself say, Jamie could write his questions down. Then, after school, someone could help him find answers. That way he learns to be patient with his curiosity instead of suppressing it. The table went quiet. Mrs. Harrow's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Grant stared at Clara with an expression she couldn't read. "That's a good idea," Jamie said. "Would you help me? You talk like a teacher." Clara's throat tightened. "I was a teacher in Philadelphia. Before—" She stopped. the platform rising in her mind like a specter. Before you came west, Grant's voice was careful, neutral. What did you teach? Primary grades, reading, arithmetic, composition, history when we had time for it. Mrs. Harrow set down her fork with deliberate precision. And you gave that up to marry a stranger? The question hung sharp in the air. Clara met the older woman's gaze, refusing to flinch. I gave it up for a promise. There's a difference. Not much of one, when the promise was a lie. Mrs. Harrow, Grant said quietly. No, she's right. Clara's hands tightened in her lap. I was a fool. I believed letters from a man I'd never met, sold everything I owned, and came west on faith alone. I have no one to blame but myself. That's not, Grant started. It is. Clara stood, began clearing plates with movements too sharp, too controlled. But I'm here now, and I'll work for my keep until I figure out what comes next. That's the agreement. She carried dishes to the sink before anyone could respond, plunging her hands into hot water that stung. Behind her, the kitchen settled back into morning routine. Grant giving Jamie last-minute instructions about school, Mrs. Harrow packing a lunch pail with brutal efficiency, the boys' reluctant footsteps toward the door. Papa, can Miss Clara come to town with us? Maybe she could talk to Miss Pritchard about the questions. Jamie, Miss Clara has work to do here. But enough. Get your coat. The front door opened and closed. Clara heard the wagon rattle away, wheels crunching gravel, Jamie's voice fading into morning distance. Then silence, broken only by the tick of the mantel clock and the hiss of dishwater against porcelain. Mrs. Harrow appeared at her elbow, dish towel in hand. You didn't have to say that about being a fool. It's true, isn't it? Truth and wisdom aren't the same thing. The older woman began drying dishes with her characteristic precision. You made a choice based on information you had. The information was false. That makes him a liar, not you a fool. Clara's hands stilled in the water. You're being kind. I'm being accurate. There's a difference. Mrs. Harrow stacked the dried plates with sharp efficiency. Now, Grant said you could stay until you figure out what's next. That means you need to actually figure it out, not just hide here washing dishes. I'm not hiding. Aren't you? Clara turned to face her. Mrs. Harrow stood with arms crossed, expression unreadable. What would you have me do? I have 3 pennies and a trunk full of useless belongings. I can't go back east. I sold everything to come here. I can't stay in town. I have no connections, no references. This ranch is the only thing standing between me and... She stopped, unwilling to name the alternatives. Between you and what? Starvation? Prostitution? Working yourself to death in a laundry? Mrs. Harrow's voice was harsh, but her eyes held something almost like understanding. You're educated. That's currency, even out here. Especially out here. There are no teaching positions. The town has Miss Pritchard. The town does. But there are 5 other settlements within riding distance, all growing, all needing schools. And there are ranches, families with children who need educating but can't spare the time for a 5-mile ride to town every day. Clara stared at her. You're suggesting I become a traveling teacher? I'm suggesting you use what you have instead of mourning what you lost. Mrs. Harrow hung the towel with precise care. But first, you need to stop acting like you're temporary. You're here. Make it matter. She left the kitchen before Clara could respond. Through the window, Clara watched her cross the yard toward the chicken coop, moving with the purposeful stride of a woman who'd long ago decided that sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. Make it matter. The words settled into Clara's chest, heavy and uncomfortable. She finished the dishes, wiped down the counters, swept the floor. Then she stood in the empty kitchen, listening to the house breathe around her. Upstairs, floorboards creaked. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnied. The world moved forward whether she was ready or not. Clara found Mrs. Harrow in the chicken coop, scattering grain with economical movements. The hens clustered around her feet, clucking contentment. I want to help, Clara said. Truly help. Not just wash dishes until I've worn out your hospitality. Mrs. Harrow scattered another handful of grain. You know anything about livestock? No. Gardening? My grandmother kept a small plot. Vegetables, mostly. Preserving? Canning? Some. She taught me the basics. Mrs. Harrow considered this, head tilted like one of her hens evaluating a strange insect. All right, here's how this works. You pull your weight on the daily tasks: cooking, cleaning, laundry, mending. That earns your room and board. You want wages on top of that, you need to contribute something more. Such as? The accounts are a mess. Sarah used to keep the books, and Grant's tried, but numbers aren't his strength. If you can make sense of the ledgers, track expenses, figure out where the money's actually going, that's worth paying for. Clara felt something spark in her chest. I can do that. I kept the school's accounts for 3 years. Then prove it. Books are in the desk in the front room. You get them sorted, show me you know what you're doing, and we'll talk wages. Mrs. Harrow fixed her with a stern look. But understand, this isn't charity. You fail to deliver, you're still washing dishes and nothing more. I understand. Good. Now make yourself useful. Those eggs aren't going to collect themselves. Clara spent the morning learning the ranch's rhythms. She collected eggs, warm and perfect, nested in straw, and learned which hens were friendly and which would peck given half a chance. She helped Mrs. Harrow hang laundry, fighting wind that tried to tear the sheets from her hands. She scrubbed the front porch, swept the main room, beat rugs until her arms ached and dust clouded the air. And through it all, she felt herself settling. Not comfortable, not yet, but present. Here. Real. After lunch, cold beef and bread, eaten standing because Mrs. Harrow didn't believe in idle sitting, Clara approached the desk in the front room. It was solid oak, scarred with use, and its surface disappeared beneath a chaotic sprawl of papers. Receipts, invoices, scribbled notes, pages torn from ledgers and stacked without order. Clara pulled out the chair and sat down, surveying the mess with the same feeling she'd had facing a classroom of rowdy students, intimidated but determined. She began sorting. Feed invoices in one pile, equipment purchases in another, sale records in a third. Slowly, patterns emerged. The ranch operated on slim margins. Most places did, but the spending showed discipline. No frivolous purchases, nothing wasted, just the steady accumulation of necessary expenses that kept a working ranch functioning. But there were gaps, missing receipts, dates that didn't align, numbers that had been crossed out and rewritten without explanation. Clara found a clean ledger and began transcribing, creating order from chaos. Hours passed. The light shifted across the desk, tracking the sun's movement. Her hand cramped, but she kept writing, finding a strange satisfaction in the columns aligning, the totals balancing, the story of the ranch revealing itself in numbers and ink. She was so absorbed she didn't hear the wagon return until Jamie burst through the front door. "Miss Clara, you're still here!" She looked up, blinking against the adjustment from figures to faces. Jamie stood in the doorway, face bright with relief so genuine it made her chest ache. "Of course I'm still here. Where else would I be?" "I thought maybe you'd leave. People always leave." The words carried weight beyond his years. Clara set down her pen and gave him her full attention. "I'm not leaving today." "Is that good enough?" Jamie considered, then nodded. "Can you help me with my questions now? I wrote 3 new ones during arithmetic." "Let me see." He produced a slate carefully chalked with round, laborious letters. "Why do clouds move? Where does the wind come from? How do birds know which way is south?" Clara studied the questions, feeling Mrs. Harrow's earlier words echo. Make it matter. These are excellent questions. And I think we can find answers, but it'll take some research. Do you have any books here? Mama had some. Papa keeps them in his room. Grant's voice came from the doorway, startling them both. "It's all right. You can use them." He leaned against the frame, still wearing his work coat, dust on his shoulders and exhaustion in his eyes. But when he looked at his son's eager face, something softened. "Go get them, Jamie." Carefully. The boy thundered upstairs. Grant moved into the room, glancing at the desk where Clara's careful columns marched across the ledger page. "Making progress?" "Some. Your expenses are reasonable, but the record-keeping is—" She stopped, searching for diplomacy. "A disaster, you can say it." "Disorganized, but salvageable." Grant pulled out another chair, sank into it with a sigh that spoke of long hours and hard labor. Sarah was the organized one. She could look at this mess and see exactly where every penny went. He gestured helplessly. I try. It's not enough. You're running a ranch alone with a child to raise. You're doing more than enough. He looked at her then, really looked, and Clara felt the intensity of that attention like a physical thing. Mrs. Harrow said you offered to help Jamie with his schoolwork. If that's acceptable, I didn't mean to overstep. You didn't. Grant's jaw worked. He's struggling. Not with the learning. He's bright as they come. But he asks questions Miss Pritchard doesn't have time to answer, and then he gets frustrated and acts out. It's become a problem. Questions aren't a problem. They're an opportunity. Not everyone sees it that way. Then not everyone should be teaching. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Grant's eyebrows rose, but before he could respond, Jamie returned with an armload of books. He dumped them on the desk beside Clara's ledgers. A mixed collection, some leather-bound and serious, others worn from constant handling. Clara picked up the top volume, The Natural Philosophy of Common Things. She opened it carefully, saw Sarah Mercer written in careful script on the flyleaf, and felt an echo of the woman who'd owned these books, worn the dress Clara now inhabited, lived in this house and loved these people. Your mother was a reader, she said softly. Jamie nodded. She said books were windows. You could look through them and see places you'd never go. She was right. Clara found the index, ran her finger down the entries. Here, on the nature and movement of clouds. Shall we read it together? They bent over the book, Jamie pressed against her side, his finger following the words as Clara read aloud. Grant watched from his chair, expression unreadable. The text explained atmospheric pressure, temperature differences, the water cycle illustrated with diagrams. Jamie listened with fierce concentration, interrupting only to ask clarifying questions that showed he was actually thinking about the concepts. When they finished, he looked up at Clara with shining eyes. So, clouds are just water that got too high and too cold? Essentially, yes. That's amazing. It's like the sky is breathing. Clara smiled. That's a beautiful way to put it. Jamie grabbed his slate. Can we do the wind one next? Tomorrow. It's getting dark, and I'm sure your father wants you to wash up for supper. The boy sighed but went, calling out questions about convection currents as he climbed the stairs. Grant stood slowly, moving like a man whose body had been tested past endurance. Thank you, he said quietly. He hasn't been that excited about learning in months. He's a bright child. He just needs someone to take his curiosity seriously. Miss Pritchard says he's disruptive. Miss Pritchard has 20 students and limited resources. That doesn't make Jamie disruptive. It makes the situation inadequate. Grant studied her, and Clara had the uncomfortable sensation of being measured against some internal standard. You miss it. Teaching. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. Yes, I thought I'd given it up for something better. A partnership, a home. Turned out I just gave it up. You could teach again. Mrs. Harrow mentioned the settlements. Mrs. Harrow has strong opinions about most things. She's usually right, though. Annoyingly. Grant moved toward the door, paused. Think about it. There are families out here desperate for someone to educate their children. Someone like you could make a real difference. He left before she could respond. Clara sat in the gathering dark, surrounded by ledgers and books, feeling the weight of possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider. Make it matter, Mrs. Harrow had said. Maybe it was time to stop mourning the life she'd lost and start building the one that waited. The evening settled into routine that felt both foreign and familiar. Clara helped Mrs. Harrow prepare supper, beef stew that had simmered all day, biscuits golden and steaming. Jamie set the table without being asked, chattering about clouds and atmospheric pressure. Grant washed up at the pump outside, coming in with clean hands and damp hair, looking less exhausted than he had earlier. They ate together, conversation flowing easy. Mrs. Harrow shared gossip from town. The mercantile was raising prices again. The preacher's wife had strong opinions about the new saloon. Someone's daughter was getting married come spring. Grant added details about the fence line, the pregnant mare, the quality of this year's hay crop. Clara listened, absorbing the rhythms of frontier life, the concerns that seemed small but weren't. Out here, a fence line determined whether your cattle strayed. The quality of hay meant the difference between livestock surviving winter or starving. Prices at the mercantile affected whether you could afford the nails that held your barn together. Everything was connected. Everything mattered. After supper, after dishes, after Jamie had been chased to bed with promises that they'd explore Wind tomorrow, Clara returned to the ledgers. The lamp burned low, casting shadows across the columns of numbers. She worked until her eyes blurred, until she'd created a clear picture of the ranch's financial health. It was better than she'd feared. Not prosperous, but stable. Grant was careful, conservative, smart about where he spent. But there were opportunities. Small things that could improve efficiency, reduce costs. She made notes in margins, suggestions she could present once she'd earned the right to give them. "You should sleep." Mrs. Harrow's voice came from the doorway. "Can't do good work on a tired mind." Clara set down her pen. "Almost finished." The older woman moved closer, studying the ledgers over Clara's shoulder. "You've made sense of it." "Mostly. There are still some gaps I'll need to ask Grant about. He'll appreciate that. He worries about money more than he admits." Mrs. Harrow straightened. "You're good at this. The organizing, the teaching, makes a body wonder why you'd give it up for a man you'd never met." Clara's hands tightened in her lap. "I was lonely. I thought marriage would fix that." "Marriage doesn't fix loneliness, just gives you company while you feel it." The blunt honesty startled a laugh from Clara. "Is that the voice of experience?" 23 years married, 2 of them happy." Mrs. Harrow's expression softened fractionally. "I love my husband, but love and happiness aren't the same thing. Took me years to learn that." "What changed? The 2 happy years? When were they?" "The last 2, when we finally stopped trying to fix each other and just were." Mrs. Harrow's voice went quiet. "Then the fever took him and the boys, and I had to learn how to be alone all over again." Clara looked at this stern, sharp woman and saw the grief underneath, the kind that never quite healed, just scarred over. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I had more than most people get, and when Grant needed help after Sarah died, I had somewhere to put all that unused love." She moved toward the door, paused. "Point is, you're not the only one who came here running from something. Grant's running from grief. I'm running from memories. Even Jamie's running, though he doesn't know it yet, running toward a mama he can barely remember. And me? What am I running from? That's for you to figure out, but running toward something is usually smarter than running away." She left Clara alone with the ledgers and the lamplight and questions that didn't have easy answers. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Clara lay in Sarah's bed, wearing Sarah's nightgown, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about the life she was borrowing. But her mind wouldn't rest. It circled back to Jamie's questions, Grant's quiet kindness, Mrs. Harrow's harsh wisdom, running toward something. What did she want to run toward? Not another man's promises. She'd learned that lesson. But maybe something of her own, a purpose that belonged to her alone. She thought about the settlements Mrs. Harrow had mentioned, families scattered across the prairie, children growing up without education because the nearest school was too far. She thought about Jamie's bright eyes when he understood about clouds, his hunger for knowledge that Miss Pritchard couldn't satisfy. Maybe there was something there. Not a rescue, not salvation, just possibility. Clara fell asleep thinking about one-room schoolhouses and primers and the particular joy of watching understanding dawn in a child's eyes. She woke to screaming, high, terrified, the sound of a child caught in nightmare. Clara threw off the quilts and ran before she was fully conscious, feet bare on cold wood, nightgown twisting around her legs. Jamie's door stood open, lamplight spilling from within. She found him thrashing in his bed, eyes wide but unseeing, crying for his mama with desperate, broken sobs. Grant was already there, sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to gather his son into his arms. But Jamie fought him, lost in whatever terror gripped his sleeping mind. "It's all right, buddy. I'm here. You're safe." But Jamie couldn't hear him. He screamed and screamed, a wordless sound that scraped Clara's heart raw. She moved without thinking, kneeling beside the bed. "Jamie, Jamie, sweetheart, listen to my voice." Something in her tone cut through. The boy's wild eyes found her face. "You're having a dream. Just a dream. But you're safe now. Your papa's here. I'm here. You're safe." She kept her voice low, calm, the same tone she'd used with frightened students. Jamie's breathing hitched, slowed. The screaming faded to whimpers. "That's it. You're doing so well. Just breathe with me. In and out. In and out." Grant watched her over his son's head, expression raw. Jamie's body gradually relaxed. He curled into Clara's arms, small and shaking, tears soaking through her nightgown. "She was leaving again," he whispered. "Mama was leaving, and I couldn't stop her." Clara's throat closed. She looked at Grant, saw the same helpless grief mirrored in his face. "She didn't want to leave," Clara said softly. "Sometimes people have to go places they don't choose, but that doesn't mean she wanted to leave you." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen how your papa talks about her. Because I've heard the stories you tell. She loved you so much that even though she's gone, that love is still here. Can you feel it?" Jamie was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded against her shoulder. "Will you stay?" he whispered. "Just until I fall asleep?" Clara looked at Grant. He nodded, wordless permission. "I'll stay." Grant stood slowly, moving like a man whose bones had turned to lead. He touched his son's head gently, then left, pulling the door halfway closed behind him. Clara settled against the headboard, Jamie curled in her lap. She hummed quietly, an old lullaby her grandmother had sung, and felt the boy's breathing gradually even out, his body growing heavy with sleep. She should move, should return to her own bed. But Jamie's hand fisted in her nightgown, holding tight even in sleep, and she couldn't bring herself to break that trust. So she stayed, watching lamplight paint shadows on the wall, listening to the house settle around them, and wondering how many times Grant had sat exactly here, alone, trying to comfort a child who wanted someone he couldn't bring back. When she finally crept back to her own room, dawn was already lightening the eastern sky. She had maybe an hour before the house woke and the day's work began. But as she slid back under her quilts, Clara realized she wasn't tired. She was awake, truly awake, in a way she hadn't been since climbing off that westbound train. Running toward something, Mrs. Harrow had said. Maybe Clara was finally ready to figure out what that something was. The morning found Clara already in the kitchen when Mrs. Harrow came down, flour dusting her hands and biscuit dough rolled out on the counter. The older woman stopped in the doorway, surprise flickering across her face before the usual stern mask settled back into place. Couldn't sleep? Slept enough. Clara cut circles from the dough with practiced efficiency. Thought I'd make myself useful. Mrs. Harrow moved to the stove, began stoking the fire. They worked in silence for several minutes, falling into the easy rhythm they'd established. Finally, the older woman spoke without looking up. "Grant told me about last night. Jamie's nightmare." Clara's hand stilled on the dough. "He has them often?" 2-3 times a week. Used to be every night, right after Sarah died. Grant would sit with him until dawn, both of them exhausted, but neither one sleeping. Mrs. Harrow's voice went soft. "Last night was the first time Jamie settled that quick. Grant said you knew exactly what to do." "I just talked to him, let him know he wasn't alone." "That's more than most people manage." Mrs. Harrow filled the coffee pot with sharp, economical movements. "That boy's been looking for a mother since the day Sarah died. You need to be careful." Clara felt the warning like a hand on her shoulder. "I'm not trying to replace her." "Don't matter what you're trying to do. Matters what a lonely child sees." Mrs. Harrow fixed her with a hard look. "Jamie's already attached. I can see it. And when you leave, and you will leave, everyone does, he's the one who'll pay the price." The words hit harder than they should have. Clara returned to cutting biscuits, using the rhythm to steady herself. "What if I don't leave?" "Then you'd be the first." Mrs. Harrow poured water into the coffee pot. "This ranch eats people. The isolation, the work, the endless prairie with nothing but wind and sky. Sarah loved it, but she was born to it. You're a city woman playing at frontier life. Give it a month. You'll be begging for the eastbound train." Clara arranged the biscuits on a baking sheet, sliding them into the oven before turning to face Mrs. Harrow fully. "You're wrong about one thing. I'm not playing. I have nowhere else to go, nothing else to return to. This isn't a temporary stop. It's the only option I have left." Desperation isn't the same as commitment. "No, but it's honest." Clara wiped flour from her hands. "I'm not Sarah." I'll never be Sarah, but I can be useful here, and useful is more than I was 3 days ago sitting on that platform. Something shifted in Mrs. Harrow's expression. Not approval exactly, but recognition. The ledgers. You finished them? Yes. I have questions about some entries, but the overall picture is clear. And? The ranch is stable. Not prosperous, but Grant's managing well with limited resources. There are small efficiencies that could improve margins, adjusting when certain supplies are purchased, negotiating better terms with the feed supplier, possibly selling directly to restaurants in Cheyenne instead of going through the stockyard. Clara kept her voice level, professional. Nothing dramatic, just careful adjustments. Mrs. Harrow studied her for a long moment. You sound like you're planning to stay a while. I sound like someone doing the job I was asked to do. The coffee began to boil. Mrs. Harrow lifted it from the heat, her movements precise. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its edge. There's a settlement meeting next week, Holder's Creek, about 12 miles north. They've been trying to organize a school, but they can't afford a full-time teacher. Been talking about hiring someone to rotate between the ranches, teach children in their own homes. She poured coffee into 2 cups, handed one to Clara. Might be worth attending. If you're serious about staying. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling its warmth seep into her palms. You're helping me. I'm giving you information. What you do with it is your business. But there was something almost gentle in the way Mrs. Harrow said it, and Clara felt the stirring of what might eventually become trust. Grant came down as they were setting the table, Jamie trailing behind him with sleepy eyes and tousled hair. The boy brightened when he saw Clara, then seemed to remember the night and went shy, hiding partially behind his father's leg. Morning, Grant said, his gaze moving between Clara and Mrs. Harrow like he was trying to read what had passed between them. Biscuits are ready, Clara said, and I believe someone has questions about wind that need answering. Jamie's shyness evaporated. Can we do that after breakfast? If your father doesn't need you for chores. Grant pulled out his chair, settling into it with the careful movements of a man whose body had been worked hard. I need to ride out to the north pasture, check that fence line. Take most of the day. Jamie can stay here if Mrs. Harrow doesn't mind. Course I don't mind. Boy can help with the washing. Jamie made a face but didn't argue. They ate quickly, Grant shoveling food with the single-minded focus of someone fueling for hard labor. He drained his coffee, stood, and reached for his coat. Clara. He stopped at the door. The books. When you have time, I'd like to hear what you found. Tonight, if that suits you. He nodded and was gone, his boots crunching across the yard toward the barn. Through the window, Clara watched him saddle a horse with efficient, practiced movements, swing up into the saddle, and ride north until the prairie swallowed him whole. The morning passed in domestic routine. Clara and Jamie spent an hour with Sarah's books, exploring convection currents and pressure systems, the boy's questions growing more sophisticated as his understanding deepened. Mrs. Harrow set them to washing, Clara scrubbing linens in the big tub, while Jamie hauled water and fed wet clothes through the wringer, his small hands working the crank with determined effort. By midday, they'd hung 2 lines worth of laundry, white sheets snapping in the wind like sails. Claire's back ached and her hands were raw from lye soap, but there was satisfaction in seeing the tangible results of work. They ate lunch on the back porch, cold chicken and bread, cups of milk still cool from the spring house. Jamie chattered between bites, telling Clara about the ranch's history, his mother's favorite spots, the places his father had taught him to ride. Papa says Mama loved the ridge best, he said, pointing toward a rise in the land to the east. She'd go up there when she needed to think, said you could see forever from the top. Clara followed his gesture, saw the land swell and fall, saw the ridge standing against the sky like a promise. Would you show me sometime? Jamie's face lit up. Really? Papa never wants to go. Says it makes him too sad. Then maybe we shouldn't. No, it's okay. Mama would want people to see it. She always said beautiful things are meant to be shared. Clara looked at this small boy carrying his mother's philosophy like a torch and felt her throat tighten. Then yes, when there's time, you can show me. The afternoon brought a visitor. Clara was in the main room working on the ledgers when she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Through the window, she saw a woman dismounting from a gray mare, tall, angular, dressed in men's trousers and a canvas coat. She moved with the easy confidence of someone utterly comfortable in her own skin. Mrs. Harrow appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. That'll be Ruth Holloway. Owns the spread west of here. Probably wants to borrow something she's too stubborn to buy. She went out to meet the visitor. Clara stayed at the desk, trying not to eavesdrop, but unable to help hearing fragments of conversation through the open door. Heard Grant picked up a stray in town. Not a stray, she's working here. Awful convenient, single woman showing up out of nowhere. Clara's hands tightened on her pen. She'd known this was coming. Small communities didn't tolerate unknowns, and she was as unknown as they came. The door opened, and Mrs. Harrow entered with Ruth Holloway in tow. Up close, the woman looked to be in her 40s, weathered by sun and wind, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. Miss Bennett, this is Ruth Holloway. Ruth, Clara Bennett. She's helping with the accounts and teaching Jamie. Ruth's gaze swept over Clara, assessing everything from her worn dress to her ink-stained fingers. Heard you got abandoned at the depot. That true? Clara set down her pen deliberately, meeting the woman's eyes. Yes. Man who did that's a fool. The blunt statement caught Clara off guard. Ruth's expression held no pity, just matter-of-fact assessment. I appreciate that. Don't appreciate it. Just stating facts. Ruth moved to the desk, glanced at the ledgers. You know bookkeeping? I do. Any good at it? Mrs. Harrow seems to think so. Ruth grunted. She's a hard woman to impress. That's a point in your favor. She turned to Mrs. Harrow. I came to tell you about the settlement meeting. Holders Creek, week from Saturday. They're voting on the school proposal. Clara knows. I mentioned it this morning. Ruth's eyebrows rose. Did you now? She looked at Clara with new interest. You thinking of teaching? I'm considering options. Good. We need teachers out here more than we need just about anything. Well, except rain. We need rain more, but teachers are a close second. Ruth moved toward the door. I'll be at that meeting. You should come. Let people see you're serious. She left as abruptly as she'd arrived, mounting her mare and riding west without a backward glance. Clara stared after her, trying to process the encounter. Ruth's good people, Mrs. Harrow said. Blunt as a hammer, but honest. If she says you should go to that meeting, you should go. I don't have a horse. You can ride with Grant. He'll be going anyway. He's on the school committee. Clara returned to the ledgers, but her mind kept drifting to the meeting, to the possibility of teaching again. It felt dangerous to hope, but the seed had been planted and she couldn't quite uproot it. Grant returned as the sun touched the horizon, horse lathered and Grant himself covered in dust and dried sweat. He unsaddled in the barn while Mrs. Harrow rang the dinner bell and came to the house moving like every muscle hurt. Jamie met him at the door. Papa, Miss Clara taught me about wind. Did you know hot air rises and that's what makes the wind blow? Grant managed a tired smile. That right? It's called convection, and there are prevailing winds that blow the same direction because of the earth spinning, and Jamie, let your father wash up before you drown him in science. The boy subsided, but his enthusiasm didn't dim. Over dinner, he recited everything he'd learned, his excitement infectious enough that even Mrs. Harrow cracked a smile. After the meal, after Jamie had been sent reluctantly to bed, Grant and Clara settled at the desk while Mrs. Harrow cleaned the kitchen. Clara walked him through the ledgers, pointing out patterns, suggesting adjustments, asking questions about entries that didn't quite make sense. Grant listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification, his tired eyes gradually sharpening with interest. You're saying if I buy feed in bulk before winter, I'd save nearly 15%? Assuming the price holds and you have storage. But yes, approximately that. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Why didn't I see that? Because you're managing everything else. The land, the livestock, Jamie, the house. Numbers aren't your strength. You said so yourself. But they're mine. Grant looked at her then, really looked, and Clara felt the weight of that attention settle over her shoulders. What did you charge for teaching? Back in Philadelphia? $30 a month plus room and board. And bookkeeping? Clara hesitated. I never charged separately. It was part of my school duties. But if you were to charge now, for straightening out this mess, for ongoing account management, for making sure I don't lose money through ignorance, what would that be worth? Her heart began to beat faster. I don't know. I'd have to... $20 a month, on top of room and board. And if you end up teaching at those ranches, whatever you charge for that is yours to keep. Clara stared at him. $20 was more than she'd hoped for, more than seemed reasonable for work she'd already been doing. That's too much. It's not. You've already saved me money I didn't know I was losing, and you're teaching Jamie more in 3 days than he's learned in 3 months at school. Grant's voice went quiet. I can afford to pay you fairly, Clara. Let me. The use of her first name sent a small shock through her system. He'd been so careful to maintain formality, to keep proper distance. This felt like a line being crossed. All right, $20 a month. He stood, offered his hand. Clara stood as well, placing her hand in his. His grip was warm, calloused, solid. Then we have an agreement. They shook, the gesture formal but charged with something Clara couldn't quite name. Grant released her hand but didn't step back, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the lines that bracketed his mouth, the faint scar on his jaw. Thank you, he said softly. For last night, with Jamie. He told me you stayed until he fell asleep. It was nothing. It wasn't. He hasn't settled that fast since Sarah died. Whatever you did, it mattered to him. Claire's throat tightened. He's a good boy. He just needed to know he wasn't alone. We all need that sometimes. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Clara wasn't sure she understood. Grant seemed to realize how close they were standing, stepped back, cleared his throat. Ruth Holloway came by earlier. Mrs. Harrow mentioned you might be interested in the settlement meeting. She suggested it might be worthwhile. It would be. Those families are desperate for education, and they're willing to pay. Not much individually, but collectively it could be steady income. If you're interested, I can take you. Meetings Saturday week. I'd appreciate that. Grant nodded, moved toward the stairs. Good night, then. And Clara. He paused, looking back. I'm glad you're here. I know the circumstances that brought you weren't what you'd hoped for, but I'm still glad. He climbed the stairs before she could respond, leaving Clara alone with the ledgers and the lamp and a feeling she didn't dare name. The week that followed established a rhythm that began to feel almost normal. Clara rose early, helped Mrs. Harrow with breakfast and morning chores, spent her afternoons on the books or teaching Jamie. The boy's nightmares continued, but each time Clara was there, sitting in the dark, talking him through the fear until he could sleep again. Grant watched these interactions with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Not disapproving, but not entirely comfortable either. Like he wasn't sure whether to be grateful or worried. Mrs. Harrow's warnings echoed in Clara's mind. The boy was getting attached, so was she, if she was honest. Jamie's questions, his bright curiosity, his absolute trust, it filled something in her she hadn't realized was empty. But she was careful not to overstep. She wasn't his mother, would never be his mother. She was just someone who happened to be here, helping where she could. Friday afternoon, Jamie asked the question she'd been half expecting. Miss Clara, will you come to Mama's Ridge with me? You said you would. They were in the barn, Clara helping him feed the chickens while Grant worked in the far paddock. The boy looked up at her with such hope that refusing felt impossible. If your father says it's all right. He will. He lets me go all the time. They found Grant mending fence, his hands sure and steady on the wire. He looked up as they approached, wiping sweat from his forehead. Papa, can I show Miss Clara the ridge, please? Grant's expression went carefully neutral. That's a long walk for someone not used to it. I can manage a walk, Clara said quietly. He looked at her, then at his son, and Clara saw the war playing out behind his eyes. The ridge was Sarah's place, sacred ground. Letting someone else there felt like betrayal. But Jamie was watching with such expectation, and Grant couldn't seem to deny his son anything. All right, but stay on the path and be back before dark. Jamie whooped and grabbed Clara's hand, practically dragging her toward the eastern pasture. Grant watched them go, and when Clara glanced back, she saw him standing motionless, still as stone, staring after them with an expression that made her chest ache. The walk took longer than Jamie had implied, the path climbing steadily through grass that whispered against their legs. The boy chattered the whole way, pointing out landmarks. The rock that looked like a turtle, the place where he'd seen a fox, the tree his mother had loved because it grew alone and stubborn in the middle of nothing. The ridge rose before them, not dramatic, but definite. They climbed the final slope and emerged onto a flat expanse of stone and grass with the world spread out below. Clara stopped, breath catching. Jamie hadn't exaggerated. From here you could see forever. The ranch lay small and neat in its valley, the barn and house like toys. Beyond them, the prairie rolled away in every direction, broken only by distant mountains standing blue against the sky. The wind blew constant and clean, carrying the scent of sage and distance. "Mama said this is where she felt closest to herself," Jamie said softly. Like she could remember who she was before all the other things. Clara understood that more than she could say. She'd lost herself somewhere between Philadelphia and Ridgewater, between the woman who believed in promises and the woman who'd sat 3 days on a platform waiting for a man who'd never come. But standing here, wind in her hair, and the world spread vast and honest below, she felt something shift. Not healing exactly, but recognition. The person she'd been was gone. The person she might become was still unformed. But here, now, in this moment, she was simply herself. And that was enough. "Your mother was wise. She was everything." Jamie's voice went small. "I'm forgetting her face. Papa says that's okay, that it's normal, but it doesn't feel okay." Clara knelt beside him, taking his small hands in hers. "You're not forgetting her. You're just remembering differently. Every time you ask a question, every time you're kind to someone, every time you notice something beautiful, that's her. Those are the things she gave you, and they're more important than faces." Jamie's eyes filled with tears. "You really think so?" "I know so." He threw his arms around her neck, holding tight. Clara wrapped him close, this motherless boy who'd somehow found his way into her guarded heart, and let him cry against her shoulder while the wind sang around them and the prairie kept its endless watch. When they finally descended, the sun was touching the horizon and Grant was waiting in the yard. He took one look at Jamie's tear-stained face and Clara's expression and seemed to understand everything. He didn't ask questions, just put his hand on his son's shoulder and guided him toward the house. But as Clara passed, Grant caught her arm gently. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "For going. For being what he needed today." Clara met his eyes and saw grief there, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like relief. "He's easy to care for," she said softly. "So are you." The words hung between them, unexpected and honest. Grant seemed to realize what he'd said, released her arm, stepped back. "Supper's almost ready. Mrs. Harrow made pot roast." He turned and went inside, leaving Clara standing in the yard with her heart beating too fast and questions she didn't have answers for. That night, after Jamie had gone to bed and Mrs. Harrow had retreated to her room, Clara found Grant on the porch. He stood at the railing, staring out at the dark prairie, and didn't turn when she joined him. "The settlement meeting," he said after a long silence. "You should know what you're walking into. These are frontier families, hardscrabble, suspicious of outsiders, and they're not going to make this easy." "I didn't expect easy." "They'll ask questions, personal questions. They'll want to know why you're here, what happened in Ridgewater, whether you're reliable. And they'll judge you for being a woman alone." "Let them judge. I can't control what people think." Grant turned to look at her then. "You're stronger than you seem." "I'm desperate. There's a difference." "No." His voice was firm. "Desperation makes people weak, makes them compromise themselves. You haven't done that. You've kept your dignity, done honest work, treated Jamie with kindness you didn't owe. That's not desperation. That's character." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "I know you well enough to know you could have given up a dozen times and didn't. I know you stayed with my son through his nightmares when you had no obligation. I know you're making something from nothing instead of just surviving." He paused. "That's more than most people manage." The honesty in his voice made her throat tight. She looked out at the darkness, gathering her thoughts. "I was so angry," she said finally, standing on that platform, realizing I'd been a fool. I wanted to disappear, to just stop existing. It felt easier than facing what came next. "What changed?" "Jamie asked if I was his new mama." Claire's voice caught. And I realized that even at my lowest, even when I'd lost everything, I could still matter to someone. Not because of what I could give them, but just because I was there. Grant was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Sarah used to say that showing up was half of love. Just being present, being there when you're needed. The rest, the grand gestures, the promises, those matter less than people think. She sounds like she understood what mattered. She did. And she'd like you, I think. For the same reasons He stopped abruptly. Clara's heart stuttered. The same reasons you what? But Grant was already moving toward the door. It's late. Should get some sleep. Big day tomorrow. He disappeared inside before she could press further, leaving Clara alone with the night and the terrible, wonderful possibility that had just opened up between them. She stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the stars and trying to sort through the tangle of feelings in her chest. Fear and hope, and something that felt dangerously like belonging. Finally, the cold drove her inside. She climbed to her room, changed into her nightgown, and lay in the darkness listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere above, Grant's floorboards creaked. Jamie murmured in his sleep, but didn't wake. Mrs. Harrow's door was closed, her breathing steady. A family, Clara thought. Not hers. Not yet. Maybe never. But a family nonetheless, and she was part of it in ways she didn't quite understand. Tomorrow they'd go to the settlement meeting. Tomorrow she'd face judgment and questions and all the complications of making a life from the wreckage of her plans. But tonight, in this house on the prairie, with the wind singing outside and people she was beginning to love sleeping nearby, Clara allowed herself something she hadn't dared since leaving Philadelphia. She allowed herself hope. Saturday arrived with cloudless skies and a wind that carried the promise of coming winter. Clara woke early, nerves singing under her skin like plucked wire. She dressed in the best she had, Sarah's dark blue calico, freshly pressed, her hair pinned severe and neat. In the mirror, she looked almost respectable, almost like someone a community might trust with their children. Almost. Mrs. Harrow was already in the kitchen, packing a basket with bread and preserves. She glanced up as Clara entered, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. You'll do. Don't fidget, don't apologize, and don't let them see you're nervous. Frontier folks respect backbone more than polish. What if they ask about Ridgewater? Then you tell the truth. Man made you a promise, broke it, and you're building something better from what's left. Anyone who judges you for that isn't worth your time anyway. Clara poured coffee with hands that wanted to shake. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Doesn't mean it's easy. Mrs. Harrow tied a cloth over the basket. These people need a teacher. You need work. The rest is just noise. Grant came down with Jamie, both of them dressed for town. The boy wore his Sunday clothes, too small in the sleeves but clean and carefully mended. He bounced with excitement, oblivious to Clara's tension. Are we really going to Holder's Creek? Papa said there might be other children there. If you're very good and very quiet during the grown-up talk, Grant said, ruffling his son's hair. He looked at Clara, and something passed between them, understanding maybe or just shared awareness of what this day meant. Ready? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. The wagon ride took nearly 2 hours, following rutted tracks that wound through prairie, slowly giving way to winter brown. Jamie chattered for the first hour, then dozed against Clara's side, warm and trusting. Grant drove in silence, his attention on the road but his thoughts clearly elsewhere. They're not bad people, he said finally. The Holders Creek families, suspicious of strangers, set in their ways, but fair if you give them reason to be. And if I don't, then you come home and we figure out something else. Home. The words settled into Clara's chest, both comfort and danger. She'd been at the ranch less than 2 weeks. Too soon to call it home. Too late to pretend it wasn't. Holders Creek wasn't much, a collection of buildings clustered where a creek cut through the land, creating a natural gathering point. The settlement hall was the largest structure, rough timber and a stone chimney, with wagons and horses already crowding the yard. Grant pulled up alongside Ruth Holloway's gray mare. The tall woman emerged from the hall, saw them, and strode over with her characteristic directness. You came. Good. She looked at Clara. Fair warning, Ezra Tompkins is going to give you grief. He thinks women have no business teaching anything but sewing and scripture. Don't let him rattle you. I'll keep that in mind. Also, Martha Keene will ask about your marriage prospects. She's got 3 sons and an unhealthy interest in matchmaking. Just smile and change the subject. Grant climbed down, offered Clara his hand. She took it, acutely aware of Ruth watching with calculating eyes. Inside, the hall was crowded and warm, smelling of wood smoke and wet wool. Families clustered in groups, men in work clothes standing stiff and uncomfortable, women with children clinging to their skirts, everyone eyeing the newcomers with open curiosity. Grant guided Clara through the crowd, making introductions. Names blurred together. The Tompkins family with their 6 children, the Keenes with 3 strapping sons who all blushed when Clara nodded hello, the Pratts and the Johnsons and the Colemans, each family carrying the weight of frontier life in their weathered faces and calloused hands. A man near the front called the meeting to order. Ben Pratt, gray-bearded and authoritative. The crowd settled into rough rows of chairs and benches, children shushed into reluctant silence. First order of business, Pratt said. The school proposal. We've talked this matter near to death, but we need a final vote. Ezra, you want to state your objections one more time? A thick-set man with a face like weathered granite stood up. This was Ezra Tompkins, Clara realized, the one Ruth had warned her about. Same objection I've had all along. We can't afford to pay a teacher when our own children can learn reading and ciphering at home. Money's better spent on things that matter, equipment, livestock, land improvements. Education matters, a woman called out. Martha Keene, judging by the 3 blushing sons beside her. For boys, maybe. Girls just need enough to read the good book and manage a household. Don't need fancy schools for that. Ruth Holloway stood, and the room went quiet. Ezra, with all due respect, you're talking out of your... She caught herself, glanced at the children. You're wrong. My spread runs smoother because I can read contracts, manage accounts, and negotiate prices. None of that came from just reading scripture. That's different. You're running a business. So is every ranch here. You telling me your wife doesn't need mathematics to manage your household, reading to understand seed catalogs, writing to correspond with suppliers? Ezra's face reddened, but he sat down muttering. Ben Pratt cleared his throat. Point is, we have the proposal. Hire a teacher to rotate between ranches, spend 2 days at each, teach children at their own homes. Families would pay based on number of students. We've run the numbers. It's sustainable if we get enough participation. Problem is finding a teacher willing to do it, someone called out. It's hard living, constant travel, and the pay's not much. Grant stood up, and Clara felt her stomach drop. We might have a solution to that. Miss Clara Bennett is a certified teacher from Philadelphia. She's been working at my ranch, and she's interested in the position. Every eye in the room turned to Clara. She felt the weight of their assessment, judging her city dress, her soft hands, her very presence in their rough community. Ben Pratt looked her over. That true, Miss Bennett? You're a real teacher? Clara stood, forcing her spine straight. I taught primary grades for 3 years in Philadelphia. Reading, arithmetic, composition, history, and natural science. I have references, though they're back east and would take time to verify. Why'd you leave? Ezra asked, suspicion thick in his voice. Clara had prepared for this, but the words still tasted like ash. I came west to marry. The gentleman changed his mind without informing me. I found myself stranded in Ridgewater with no funds and no prospects. Mr. Mercer offered me work, and I accepted. The room went silent. Clara felt judgment pressing in from all sides, felt the story of her humiliation spreading like oil across water. Then Martha Keene stood up. That's rough dealing. Man who'd do that doesn't deserve to be called a gentleman. Agreed, Ruth said, and it takes backbone to admit being wronged instead of making excuses. I say that speaks well of her character. Or speaks to poor judgment in men, Ezra muttered. Grant's voice cut across the murmurs. Miss Bennett has been teaching my son for 2 weeks. He's learned more in that time than he did in 3 months at the town school. She's patient, knowledgeable, and she actually cares about whether children understand or just memorize. That's worth something. A woman in the back spoke up. What would you teach, Miss Bennett, if we hired you? Clara took a breath, found her teacher's voice. Reading and writing fundamentals for the younger children. Mathematics through basic algebra for the older ones. Natural science, geography, history, critical thinking skills, how to ask questions and find answers, how to learn independently, which matters more out here than in cities where schools are plentiful. What about scripture? Ezra demanded. I'll teach children to read. What they read is their family's decision, not mine. And discipline? You going to spare the rod with other people's children? Clara met his eyes steadily. I've never found beating children makes them smarter. I use clear expectations, natural consequences, and the principle that earning respect works better than demanding it. Ezra snorted, soft city thinking. Maybe, but in 3 years I never had a student who didn't learn to read. Can every teacher say that? The room stirred, murmurs passing between families. Ben Pratt held up his hand for quiet. All right, let's put it to a vote. All in favor of hiring Miss Bennett to teach on the rotating schedule, raise your hands. Clara watched hands rise, slowly at first, then with more confidence. Ruth shot up immediately. Martha Keene's followed. Grant's rose, then several others. She counted silently, heart hammering. Opposed? Fewer hands this time. Ezra's among them, along with 2 other men who looked like they'd rather trust a rattlesnake than a woman with ideas. Ben Pratt counted, nodded. Motion carries. Miss Bennett, you're hired. Pays $5 per family per month, paid quarterly. Schedule rotates every 2 days, 6 families participating to start. That's $30 a month if everyone pays on time, which they won't, so expect closer to $25. Combined with what Grant was paying her for the books, Clara would be earning more than she had in Philadelphia. The realization made her dizzy. I accept. Thank you. Don't thank us yet. Wait till you've spent a week hauling primers through a blizzard. Now, next order of business. The meeting continued, but Clara barely heard it. She was employed. Legitimately, respectably employed. Not just surviving on Grant's charity, but earning her own way. Families approached afterward, some friendly, some reserving judgment. Martha Keene insisted Clara come for supper the following week to meet her boys properly. Such nice boys, and poor Thomas is just your age, and he's been so lonely since his wife passed, until Ruth rescued her with a pointed comment about matchmaking being a full-time occupation. Jamie had found other children and was playing some complicated game involving running and shouting. Grant stood talking with Ben Pratt, but his eyes tracked Clara across the room, checking on her with the same attention he gave his livestock. As families began loading wagons for the journey home, a woman approached Clara hesitantly, young, maybe 20, with a baby on her hip and 2 small children clutching her skirt. Miss Bennett? I'm Sarah Johnson. My husband John and we've got the spread furthest out, 12 miles past the Tompkins place. I remember. You voted in favor. Sarah's face brightened. Yes, ma'am. We've got 4 children already and another coming. I never learned proper reading, and John, he can cipher some, but not enough to teach. We want better for our babies. I'll do my best for them. Thank you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. You don't know what this means. Out here, seems like children either grow up rough or they leave soon as they're able. Maybe with learning, they can have choices, real choices. Clara thought about the platform in Ridgewater, about arriving in a strange place with no choices left. She understood what Sarah was asking for. They'll have choices, I promise you that. The ride home was quieter than the ride out. Jamie slept sprawled across the wagon bed, exhausted by playing. Grant drove steady, and Clara sat beside him watching the prairie slide past in the afternoon light. You did well, Grant said finally. Standing up to Ezra, talking about your teaching. Most people would have crumbled. I was terrified. Didn't show. That's what matters. He was quiet for a moment. $25 a month from teaching, $20 from the books. That's more than most men make out here. Does that bother you? No, but it changes things. Clara's stomach tightened. Changes what? You're not dependent on me anymore. You could get your own place if you wanted. Room at the boarding house in town, or one of the families would probably take you in. The thought of leaving the ranch hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd been there barely 2 weeks, but the idea of not waking to Mrs. Harrow's sharp commands, not teaching Jamie over breakfast, not seeing Grant's tired smile at the end of long days, it felt wrong. Do you want me to leave? Grant's hands tightened on the reins. No, but I don't want you staying out of obligation either. You've got options now, real ones. And if I choose to stay? He looked at her then, and Clara saw something raw in his expression, hope and fear and something deeper she didn't dare name. Then I'd be grateful. Jamie would be too. And Mrs. Harrow, though she'd never admit it. Just them? Grant's throat worked. Not just them. The words hung between them, weighted with everything they weren't saying. Clara felt her heart beating too fast, felt the careful distance they'd maintained beginning to crack. I'll stay, she said quietly. If that's all right. More than all right. They didn't speak again until the ranch appeared in the valley below, lamplight glowing in the windows where Mrs. Harrow waited. Grant pulled the wagon into the yard, and Jamie woke groggily as they stopped. Are we home? We're home, buddy. Come on, let's get you inside. Clara climbed down, legs stiff from the long ride. Mrs. Harrow appeared on the porch, arms crossed. Well, did they hire you or send you packing? Hired. 6 families to start, rotating every 2 days. Something that might have been approval flickered across Mrs. Harrow's face. Good. You'll need warm clothes for traveling. I'll see what can be altered from Sarah's winter things. She disappeared inside before Clara could thank her. Grant was unhitching the horses, moving with the ease of long practice. Clara moved to help, earning a surprised glance. You don't have to... I know, but I want to learn. If I'm staying, I should understand how things work. Grant showed her how to unbuckle the harness, how to lead the horses to the barn, how to brush them down properly. His hands guided hers on the curry comb, patient and sure, and Clara was acutely aware of his warmth behind her, his breath stirring her hair. Like this, he said quietly. Long strokes, following the muscle. They liked the pressure. Clara focused on the horse, on the rhythm of brushing, trying to ignore the way her skin tingled where Grant's hand rested on her shoulder to steady her. When the horses were settled and fed, they walked back to the house through the gathering dusk. Grant stopped at the porch steps, looking up at the sky where the first stars were emerging. I need to tell you something, he said, before this goes any further. Clara's heart stuttered. All right. I loved Sarah. Still love her, probably always will. She was my best friend, my partner, the mother of my son. When she died, I thought that was it. Thought I'd never feel anything for anyone again. Clara waited, afraid to breathe. But these past 2 weeks, watching you with Jamie, seeing how you fit into our lives, I've started feeling things I didn't think I'd feel again. And it scares me, because I don't want to dishonor Sarah's memory, but I also don't want to lie to myself about what's happening. What is happening? Grant turned to face her fully. I'm falling in love with you, or maybe I already have, and I needed you to know that before you decided whether to stay, because it changes the equation, changes what you'd be walking into. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. You think I haven't noticed? You think I don't feel it too? Do you? Yes, and it terrifies me, because the last time I trusted my feelings about a man, I ended up stranded on a platform with nothing. But this feels different. You feel different. Grant stepped closer, close enough that Clara could see the pulse beating in his throat. I'm not making promises I can't keep. I'm not offering you some fantasy of easy happiness. This is hard country, hard living, and I come with a grieving son and more baggage than any man should carry. I come with my own baggage. A failed engagement, no family, no prospects beyond what I can earn. I'm not some prize you'd be winning. You're wrong about that. Grant's voice was rough. You're the bravest, strongest, most real person I've met in years. And if you'll have me, have us, I swear I'll do right by you. Clara's breath caught. Grant, I'm not asking for an answer now, just asking you to think about it, about whether this could be something more than just work, more than convenience. Before Clara could respond, the front door opened and Mrs. Harrow's voice cut through the moment. Supper's ready. If you two are done standing around in the cold, you might want to come eat while it's hot. Grant stepped back and the spell broke. But as they climbed the porch steps, he caught Clara's hand and squeezed it gently. Think about it, he said again. Inside the house was warm and bright and smelled of Mrs. Harrow's stew. Jamie was already at the table, talking excitedly about the children he'd met. The older woman served food with her usual efficiency, but Clara caught her watching Grant and Clara with shrewd, knowing eyes. They ate, and Clara barely tasted the food. Her mind kept circling back to Grant's words. Falling in love. The phrase felt dangerous and precious, like something fragile she might break just by acknowledging it. After supper, after dishes, after Jamie had been tucked in with a promise that they'd start his lessons tomorrow, Clara sat in the main room pretending to read, while her thoughts spun. Grant was in his study going over ranch business and Mrs. Harrow had retired early, leaving Clara alone with lamplight and questions that had no easy answers. She thought about Philadelphia, about the woman she'd been who believed in letters and promises. She thought about Charles Whitmore and the platform and the certainty that her life was over. She thought about how wrong she'd been. Her life hadn't ended on that platform. It had just changed direction, become something she couldn't have imagined. Clara set down her book and climbed the stairs to Grant's study. She found him at his desk, frowning over paperwork. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression went soft. Couldn't sleep? Couldn't stop thinking. About? Clara crossed the room, her heart hammering. When she reached his desk, she stopped, gathering courage. You asked me to think about whether this could be more. I have an answer. Grant stood slowly, coming around the desk. Already? I don't need more time. I spent months making careful, rational decisions about Charles Whitmore. I weighed every letter, analyzed every promise, tried to be smart about my future, and I was completely wrong about all of it. Clara, let me finish. This thing between us, it's not careful or rational. It's terrifying and complicated and probably foolish. But it's real. More real than anything I felt with Charles. More honest than any promise he made. Grant's eyes searched hers. What are you saying? I'm saying yes. To whatever this is. To trying. To seeing if what we're feeling can become something that lasts. Grant's breath left him in a rush. You're sure? No. But I'm brave enough to try anyway. He reached for her then, cupping her face in his calloused hands with a gentleness that made her throat ache. I don't deserve you. You do. And I don't deserve you. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is we found each other anyway. Grant leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. Clara didn't move. When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home and stepping off a cliff simultaneously, terrifying and perfect and absolutely right. The kiss was brief, tender, full of promise and uncertainty and hope. When they pulled apart, Grant rested his forehead against hers. We'll take this slow, he said. No rushing. Jamie needs time to adjust, and we need to be sure. Agreed. But, Clara, I meant what I said. I'm falling in love with you. She smiled against his shoulder. I'm falling too, and this time I think I'll actually land somewhere good. They stood together in the lamplight, holding each other carefully, two broken people learning to believe in second chances. Outside, the prairie wind sang against the windows, and somewhere in the darkness the future waited, uncertain but no longer quite so frightening. Clara thought about the platform at Ridgewater, about the woman who'd sat there thinking her story was over. If she could go back and tell that woman what waited just 3 miles down a dusty road, she wouldn't have believed it. Sometimes the best things came from the worst moments. Sometimes getting lost was the only way to find yourself. And sometimes, just sometimes, the man who promised you nothing turned out to be worth more than the one who promised everything. Clara pulled back enough to look at Grant's face, memorizing this moment. The warmth in his eyes, the hope in his expression, the sense that they were standing on the edge of something that could either break them or make them whole. No matter what happens, she said quietly, thank you for finding me on that platform. Thank you for seeing more than just someone who needed rescuing. Grant's thumb brushed her cheek. Thank you for being brave enough to get in the wagon. They stood together until the lamp burned low. Then Grant walked her to her room, kissed her forehead gently, and retreated to his own space. Clara changed for bed, her mind too full for sleep. Through the window, she could see the ridge where Sarah had gone to remember herself. Clara sent a silent thought to the woman whose clothes she wore, whose books she read, whose family she was slowly, carefully joining. Thank you for leaving something beautiful behind. I promise I'll take care of them. The wind answered, soft and constant, carrying the scent of sage and distance and possibility. Clara closed her eyes and let herself imagine a future that looked nothing like the one she'd planned, but felt more right than anything she'd imagined. Tomorrow she'd start teaching. Tomorrow she'd begin building the life she'd been too afraid to want. But tonight, she simply existed in the moment. No longer the platform's ghost, no longer the woman who'd been abandoned. Just Clara, finding her way home. The teaching began on a Monday morning crisp with October cold. Clara rode out with Grant to the Tompkins place, her saddlebag heavy with primers and slates, her stomach tight with nerves that had nothing to do with the coming winter. Ezra Tompkins met them in the yard, his expression suggesting he'd swallowed something bitter. His wife Mary stood behind him, wiping her hands on her apron, 6 children ranging from 14 down to 4 clustered around her skirts like nervous chicks. 2 days, Ezra said without preamble. You teach reading and ciphering, nothing fancy. No filling their heads with ideas above their station. Clara dismounted, meeting his eyes steadily. I'll teach them to think. Whether that's above their station is for them to decide. Ezra's jaw tightened, but Mary stepped forward with a smile that held quiet desperation. Come inside, Miss Bennett. I've cleared the table for you to work. The Tompkins cabin was small and cramped, smelling of wood smoke and too many bodies in too little space. But it was clean, and the children who gathered around Clara's makeshift desk were hungry for learning in a way that made her chest ache. The oldest, Thomas, could read haltingly. The youngest knew her letters. The ones in between existed in various states of confusion, trying to piece together knowledge from fragments overheard and half-remembered. Clara spent the first hour simply assessing, listening to them read, watching them work simple arithmetic. Then she began to teach, and the world narrowed to conjugations and multiplication tables, and the particular joy of watching understanding dawn in young faces. Grant returned for her at dusk. The children clung to her skirts as she prepared to leave, begging for one more story, one more problem, one more minute. Tomorrow, Clara promised, we'll pick up right where we left off. On the ride home, Grant watched her with something like wonder. You love it, teaching. I'd forgotten how much. Clara's voice was tired but satisfied. They're so eager, Grant. Even the ones who pretend they don't care, they're desperate to learn. They just needed someone to show them it matters. You showed them more than that. You showed them they matter. The words settled warm in Clara's chest. That night, exhausted and content, she fell asleep thinking about lesson plans and how to explain fractions using fence posts and cattle. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that felt like breathing. 2 days at each ranch, teaching children who ranged from barely 4 to nearly grown. The Pratts, with their 3 shy daughters, who whispered answers and blushed at praise. The Keens, with their rambunctious boys, who treated learning like wrestling, messy and enthusiastic, and surprisingly effective. The Johnsons furthest out, where Sarah cried with gratitude watching her children learn to write their names. Between teaching, Clara managed the ranch accounts, helped Mrs. Harrow with endless chores, and spent her evenings with Jamie exploring questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how bread rose. The boy bloomed under the attention, his nightmares growing less frequent, his laughter coming easier. And through it all, Clara felt herself falling deeper in love with Grant Mercer. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was the accumulation of small moments, the way he checked her saddle before every teaching trip, making sure she'd be safe. The evenings they spent reviewing the ranch books together, their shoulders touching as they bent over ledgers. The careful distance he maintained around Jamie, both of them aware that the boy was watching, learning what love looked like from how they treated each other. They didn't rush. Grant had been right about that. They needed time, needed to be sure. But the wanting grew regardless, building like pressure behind a dam. November brought the first real cold, and with it, a letter. Clara found it waiting when she returned from teaching at the Coleman Ranch, placed carefully on her pillow. Her name in unfamiliar handwriting, a Philadelphia postmark. Her heart stuttered as she opened it, half expecting some ghost from her past to reach out and drag her back. It was from Margaret Chen, her former teaching colleague, and the closest thing she'd had to a friend in Philadelphia. Dear Clara, it began, I heard through mutual acquaintances about your situation in Ridgewater. I'm writing with both concern and opportunity. The Grimshaw Academy is expanding and needs qualified teachers. The position pays $45 monthly with room and board. If you're interested, I can personally recommend you to the headmistress. Please write soon. Philadelphia misses you. I miss you. $45. nearly double what she made now, in a city with culture and society and the familiar comforts of civilization. A year ago, even a month ago, Clara would have leapt at such an offer. Now she stared at the letter, feeling only a strange, distant sadness. She found Grant in the barn, mending tack by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, saw her expression, and set down his work. "What is it?" Clara handed him the letter without speaking. She watched his face as he read, watched comprehension settle into something that looked like resignation. "That's a good offer," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Better than what you're making here." "Yes." "And Philadelphia's where you're from. You'd have friends there. Stability." "Yes." Grant set the letter aside, his hands clenching briefly before he forced them to relax. "I won't ask you to stay. That wouldn't be fair. You've got to make the choice that's right for you." Clara moved closer, close enough to see the lamplight catching gold in his eyes. "And what if what's right for me is here?" His breath caught. "You can't know that. Not for certain." "Can I?" She took the letter from his hand, folded it deliberately, and set it aside. "Philadelphia was my past, Grant. It's where I came from, but it's not where I belong." "Clara, but let me finish. I loved teaching there, loved the work, but I was lonely in a way I didn't understand until I came here. I was surrounded by people and completely alone." She took his hands, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard labor and honest living. "Here, I matter. Not just as a teacher, but as a person. To Jamie, to Mrs. Harrow, to the families I teach. To you." Grant's hands tightened on hers. "You matter more than you know." "Then don't tell me to leave. Don't be noble about giving me choices when what I want is right here." "What do you want?" Clara's heart hammered, but her voice stayed steady. "I want to stay. I want to keep teaching these children who need me. I want to help Jamie understand the world. I want to sit with you in the evenings going over accounts and talking about nothing and everything." She paused. "And I want to see if what we're building can become something permanent." Grant pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her like he was afraid she might disappear. Clara pressed her face against his chest, hearing his heart beat fast and hard. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I've been trying not to, trying to give you space to choose freely. But I love you, Clara Bennett, and the thought of you leaving tears me apart." "Then it's good I'm staying." They stood together in the lamplight, holding each other while the horses shifted in their stalls and the wind sang against the barn walls. When they finally pulled apart, Grant's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "Marry me." Clara's breath stopped. "What?" "Marry me. Not because you're desperate or because you need security. Marry me because you want this life, this family, this future. Marry me because you love me the way I love you." Clara thought about the platform at Ridgewater, about sitting there waiting for a man who'd made promises he never intended to keep. She thought about Grant offering her a meal with no expectations, giving her work when she had nothing, teaching her that real promises were kept in actions, not words. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Grant kissed her then, deep and sure and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were trembling. "We should tell Jamie," Clara said, "but carefully. He needs to understand this doesn't erase his mother." "He'll understand. He's already told me he hopes you stay forever." Grant's smile was crooked, vulnerable. "Apparently he asked you weeks ago if you were his new mama." "He did, and I told him I couldn't replace his mother. That's still true. You're not replacing her. You're adding to what we are. Sarah would want that. She'd want Jamie to have someone who loves him the way you do." They walked back to the house hand in hand. Inside, Mrs. Harrow took one look at their faces and set down her knitting. "About time," she said. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around it until spring." Jamie looked up from the book he'd been struggling through. "Dance around what?" Grant knelt beside his son, and Clara knelt too, both of them at the boy's level. "Jamie, you know Miss Clara's been living here for a while now, teaching you, helping with the ranch. I like when she's here. She makes things better." "That's good. Because I've asked her to stay forever, to marry me and become part of our family." Jamie's eyes went wide. He looked at Clara, then back at his father, processing with the careful deliberation of a child who'd learned that adults sometimes left. Forever? You promise? I promise, Clara said softly. I'm not going anywhere. But what about Mama? You're not going to make us forget her, are you? Clara's throat tightened. She reached for Jamie's hand. Never. Your mama will always be your mama. I'm just someone else who loves you. Is that all right? Jamie was quiet for a long moment. Then he launched himself at Clara, wrapping thin arms around her neck with desperate strength. Can I call you Mama Clara, so I can have both? Clara looked at Grant over Jamie's head and saw tears tracking down his face. She held the boy close, feeling her own tears fall. Yes, sweetheart. You can call me Mama Clara. Mrs. Harrow wiped at her eyes with the corner of her apron. Well, suppose we should start planning a wedding. Though, if you're expecting anything fancy, you've come to the wrong territory. Grant laughed, rough and relieved. We don't need fancy, just honest. The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in December, giving families time to finish harvest and prepare for winter's full arrival. Word spread through the community with the speed of prairie fire, and with it came an outpouring of support that surprised Clara. Martha Keene insisted on making the wedding dress, appearing at the ranch with bolts of cream-colored silk she'd been saving for something special. Ruth Holloway volunteered her house for the reception, claiming it was the only place large enough to hold everyone who'd want to celebrate. Even Ezra Tompkins, grudging and gruff, showed up one evening with a hand-carved blanket chest. For your household goods, he muttered, not meeting Clara's eyes. My Mary says every bride needs one. Clara accepted it with tears in her eyes, understanding the gift for what it was, acceptance, hard-won and precious. But 2 weeks before the wedding, trouble arrived in the form of a telegram. Grant brought it from town, his face tight with something Clara couldn't read. He handed her the thin paper without speaking. Charles Whitmore, arriving Ridgewater, Nov 28. Wishes to speak with you regarding previous arrangement. Will be staying at Ridgewater Hotel. Clara stared at the words until they blurred. Charles, coming here, wanting to speak about their arrangement, as if he hadn't abandoned her on a platform 3 months ago. What do you want to do? Grant asked quietly. I don't know. Clara's hand shook. Why would he come now? Maybe he heard you're getting married. Maybe he wants to make trouble. Mrs. Harrow appeared in the doorway, sharp eyes missing nothing. Or maybe he's realized what he lost and wants it back. Men do that sometimes. Don't value something until another man claims it. The thought made Clara's stomach turn. She looked at Grant, saw worry and anger warring in his expression. I need to see him, to understand why. I'll come with you. No, this is something I need to do alone. Clara took his hand, squeezed it. I'm not the woman he left on that platform anymore, Grant. He can't hurt me the way he could have then. Grant searched her face. You're sure? I'm sure. But I appreciate you wanting to protect me. They rode to Ridgewater together the following Saturday, but Grant waited at the Mercantile while Clara walked to the hotel alone. Her heart hammered, but her steps stayed steady. She found Charles in the hotel dining room, and the sight of him hit her with unexpected force. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a polished way, well-dressed, his smile practiced and charming. The man she'd traveled 800 miles to marry. He stood as she approached, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. Clara, you look different. She did. The soft city woman who'd believed his letters was gone, replaced by someone weathered and strong, someone who'd learned her worth through hard work and honest love. What do you want, Charles? He gestured to a chair. Clara remained standing. I made a mistake, he said, his voice carrying the smooth persuasiveness she remembered. Marrying Beatrice. We're not compatible. I've been miserable. I'm sorry to hear that. I was wrong to handle things the way I did. I should have telegraphed, should have explained. I panicked when Beatrice's husband died and she needed someone, and He trailed off, spreading his hands. I'm sorry, Clara, truly. Why are you here? Charles leaned forward, earnest and intense. Because I heard you're marrying some rancher, some rough frontier man with a child, and I couldn't let you do that without telling you the truth. I still want you. Beatrice and I can divorce. It'll cause scandal, but we can weather it together. Come back east with me. We can start over, have the life we planned. Clara stared at him, feeling nothing. No anger, no longing, not even satisfaction at seeing him grovel. Just a distant pity for the man who thought love was something you could schedule and rearrange at convenience. No. Clara, please, I know I hurt you, but I can make it right. I have money, connections. I can give you everything. You can't give me anything I want. Clara's voice was steady, clear. You see Grant as some rough frontier man, but he's the most honorable person I've ever met. He kept every promise he made to me, even the ones he never spoke aloud. He values honesty over convenience, and he loves me for who I am, not who he wants me to be. You can't possibly love him. You barely know him. I know him better than I ever knew you. I know he'll sit up all night with his son through nightmares. I know he pays his workers fairly even when it cuts into his own profit. I know he offered me help when I had nothing, asked for nothing in return, and has spent every day since showing me what real partnership looks like. Charles's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. You'll regret choosing this hard life over what I'm offering. The only mistake I made was believing a stranger's letters instead of trusting my own judgment. Clara turned to leave, then paused. I'm grateful, actually. You abandoning me was the best thing that could have happened. It brought me somewhere I actually belong, to people who actually value me. So thank you, Charles. And goodbye. She walked out without looking back, feeling lighter with every step. Behind her, she heard Charles call her name, but the sound seemed to come from very far away, echoing from a life that no longer had any hold on her. Grant was waiting outside the mercantile, pacing like a caged animal. He saw her and froze, searching her face. Well? Clara walked straight into his arms. He wanted me to come back, to leave you and return to Philadelphia with him. Grant's arms tightened around her. And I told him no. Told him I found something real here, and I'm not letting it go. She pulled back to look at him. I'm not letting you go. The kiss was deep and claiming, right there on Ridgewater's main street where anyone could see. When they broke apart, Clara saw Martin Jeffers watching from the depot platform, the same man who'd told her about Charles's marriage 3 months ago. He met her eyes and tipped his hat, something like approval in his expression. Clara waved back, then let Grant help her onto her horse. As they rode away from Ridgewater, she looked back once at the platform where her old life had ended. Then she turned forward, toward the ranch and the future and the family waiting for her, and didn't look back again. The wedding day arrived cold and clear, the kind of December morning that turned breath to frost and made the world look carved from crystal. Clara dressed in Martha Keene's cream silk, the dress fitting perfectly despite being made from measurements and guesswork. Mrs. Harrow fussed with the buttons, her fingers gentle despite their usual brusqueness. Sarah would approve, the older woman said quietly. She always said the measure of a person was how they treated those who couldn't help them in return. You've been good to her, boy, good to this family, that's all she'd care about. Clara blinked back tears. I hope you're right. I'm always right. Now stop crying or you'll ruin your face. The ceremony took place at Ruth Holloway's ranch, the house packed with everyone Clara had come to know over the past months. The families she taught, their children squirming in Sunday clothes, the neighboring ranchers who'd watched her arrival with suspicion and had slowly, grudgingly accepted her as one of their own. Jamie stood beside his father, solemn in a new shirt, holding the ring they'd bought in Cheyenne. When Clara appeared in the doorway on Mrs. Harrow's arm, the boy's face split in a grin so wide it seemed to light the room. Grant stood at the front wearing his best suit, cleaned and pressed, his hair still damp from washing. When he saw Clara, his expression did something that made her chest ache, wonder and joy and a love so pure it felt like benediction. The vows were simple, spoken in front of people who valued honesty over poetry. Clara promised to stand beside Grant through hard times and good, to help raise his son with love and wisdom, to build a life that honored both past and future. Grant promised to cherish her, to value her mind as much as her heart, to remember that she'd chosen this life freely and to never take that choice for granted. When Ben Pratt pronounced them married, the room erupted in cheers. Grant kissed Clara carefully, thoroughly, while Jamie bounced on his toes and the assembled crowd hollered their approval. The reception was loud and joyful, full of food and music and dancing that lasted until the children fell asleep in corners and the adults were too exhausted to continue. Clara danced with Grant, with Jamie, with every man who asked and several women who insisted. As the evening wound down, Sarah Johnson approached Clara with something wrapped in cloth. "This was in my family," she said shyly. "Belonged to my grandmother. When you helped my children learn to read, you gave them something nobody can take away. I wanted you to have something permanent, too." Clara unwrapped the cloth and found a silver locket, tarnished but beautiful, with space for 2 photographs inside. "One for each mama," Sarah said softly. "So Jamie can carry both." Clara's vision blurred. She hugged Sarah tight, this young frontier mother who understood that love wasn't finite, that hearts could expand to hold more than one person in the space marked mother. They rode home in the wagon as stars wheeled overhead, Jamie asleep between them, the prairie stretching vast and quiet on all sides. When they reached the ranch, Grant carried his son inside while Clara stood in the yard, looking up at the sky. So many stars, more than she'd ever imagined existed, all of them burning steady and constant, witnessing this moment when her new life truly began. "Mrs. Mercer," Grant's voice came from the porch, warm with affection and something deeper. "Coming inside?" Clara turned, saw him silhouetted against the lamplight, saw the home they'd built together waiting warm and welcoming. "Yes," she said, "I'm coming." Inside, Mrs. Harrow had left a fire burning and a pot of coffee warming. Grant poured them each a cup while Clara checked on Jamie, finding him sprawled across his bed, still in his Sunday clothes, dead to the world. She tucked a quilt over him, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Good night, sweet boy." "Love you, Mama Clara," he mumbled, not quite awake. Clara's heart swelled until it felt too large for her chest. She returned to the kitchen where Grant waited, and he pulled her into his arms. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I knew how to be." They stood together in the quiet house, listening to it settle around them. This house that had belonged to Sarah, that now belonged to them, that would someday belong to Jamie and whoever he brought into it. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Grant said quietly. "After Sarah died, I thought that was it. Thought I'd just exist, go through the motions. And now? Now I'm alive again, because of you." Clara tilted her face up, and Grant kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of patience and passion held carefully in check. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Come to bed," Grant said. "It's been a long day." They climbed the stairs together, past Jamie's room where soft snores drifted into the hallway, past Mrs. Harrow's closed door, to the room that had been Grant's alone and was now theirs. Inside, lamplight cast soft shadows, and Clara saw her trunk, the same trunk that had sat beside her on the Ridgewater platform, now nestled beside Grant's dresser like it belonged there. Because it did. Because she did. Grant pulled her close, and Clara went willingly, thinking about all the paths that had led here. The letters from a stranger that had seemed like fate. The platform where she'd thought her story ended. The wagon ride with a stern rancher and his solemn son that had actually been the beginning of everything. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best destinations. Sometimes getting lost was how you found yourself. And sometimes, just sometimes, the man you weren't looking for turned out to be exactly who you needed. Outside, the wind sang across the prairie, carrying the scent of sage and snow and possibility. The stars burned bright and constant, bearing witness to a woman who traveled 800 miles for the wrong reason and found the right life anyway. Clara had come west to marry a stranger's promise. Instead, she'd married an honest man, become mother to a motherless boy, and built a future from the wreckage of her plans. And as Grant's arms tightened around her and she heard Jamie's soft breathing down the hall and felt the solid weight of home settling around her like a blessing, Clara knew with absolute certainty that every painful step had been worth it. The platform's ghost was finally, truly gone. In her place stood Clara Mercer, teacher, wife, mother, partner, whole and happy and exactly where she was meant to be. The prairie wind whispered agreement, and somewhere in the darkness, Clara could have sworn she heard a woman's voice carried on that wind, Sarah's voice maybe, offering blessing from wherever she'd gone. "Take care of them," the wind seemed to say. "Love them well." "I will," Clara whispered back. "I promise." And unlike the promises that had brought her west, This one she knew she'd keep. Not because she had to, because she wanted to, because home wasn't a place you traveled to. It was the people who made room for you in their hearts and called you family. And Clara Mercer was finally, beautifully, completely home.